The sky over New York died at 3:47 p.m., not gradually, not with warning. One moment sunlight carved sharp angles across the Hudson, and the next, a shell of living darkness swallowed the atmosphere whole. Street lamps triggered their emergency protocols. Car headlights snapped on in unison. People stopped mid-stride and looked up at what used to be afternoon. Carol Danvers hit the barrier at Mach 4 and bounced. The impact rang through her skeleton. She tumbled backward through suddenly freezing air, stabilized, and tried again. Same result. The shell covering Earth felt organic under her fists, yielding without breaking, absorbing kinetic energy like a living thing, learning her rhythm. Below Manhattan transformed into a panic grid. Intersections clogged, horns created a discordant symphony. Emergency sirens joined the chorus as FDNY trucks tried to navigate streets where people abandoned vehicles and ran without knowing which direction offered safety. Captain America's voice cut through Carol's calm. "Danvers, pull back. We need you down here." She descended toward the coordinates Steve transmitted, scanning the skyline. Windows reflected her energy signature as she dropped altitude. The Chrysler Building stood dark against darker sky. Behind it, shapes moved. Dragons, not metaphorical, not exaggerated. Actual dragons, their bodies composed of the same viscous shadow that sealed Earth from its sun. They fell from the dome's interior surface like rain made predatory. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Carol counted 23 before losing track as they scattered across the 5 boroughs. She landed on 5th Avenue, outside the hastily erected command post. Steve stood with his shield already dented, coordinating teams through a headset while keeping one eye on the sky. Tony's armor gleamed under emergency lighting arc reactor, painting blue highlights on the surrounding chaos. "Situation?" Carol asked. Steve pointed upward. "Complete atmospheric enclosure. SWORD confirms it extends into orbit. We're cut off. The thing's falling. Symbiote dragons." Tony's HUD flickered as he compiled data. Null's opening move. Scans indicate they're not individual organisms, but extensions of a unified biomass, hive architecture. The nearest dragon slammed into a subway entrance 2 blocks east. Concrete exploded. Screaming followed, then silence too sudden to be natural. Carol's jaw tightened. "Civilians?" she asked. "That's our priority," Steve said. "Evacuation corridors. We hold the intersections, funnel people towards safe zones. Tony's running numbers on capacity." Tony's expression behind his faceplate carried the weight of bad math. "Madison Square Garden holds 20,000. We've got 8 million people in this city alone." A woman ran past carrying a child, both of them covered in dust from a collapsed storefront. The little girl's eyes were too wide locked on something overhead. Carol followed her gaze and saw a dragon perched on the Flatiron Building's spire wings, spread like judgment. Strange materialized in a cascade of golden sparks, his cloak of levitation settling around his shoulders. Soot streaked his face. Blood marked his knuckles where skin had split against something hard. "The Sanctum's wards are holding," he reported. "Barely. This darkness has mass. Pressure. It's not absence of light. It's presence of something else." "Can you dispel it?" Steve asked. "I've tried. This isn't magic in any traditional sense. It's primordial. Older than the structures I channel." Strange's hands moved in precise gestures. Golden mandalas spinning to life and then collapsing. Imagine trying to banish gravity itself. Another dragon hit the street 3 blocks north. The ground buckled. Gas mains ruptured with orange blooms that looked wrong against the perpetual twilight. NYPD officers fired into the creature with standard ammunition that passed through its mass like rain through smoke. Carol shot forward photon blasts, carving through the dragon's torso. It screeched, reforming around the damage. She hit it again, sustained burn this time. And finally the creature fragmented into smaller masses that oozed toward the nearest storm drain. Her calm crackled. Tony's voice carried an edge she recognized from their worst days. "Carol, I need you on containment." Pattern suggests they're establishing hive nodes for infection spread. We lose the intersections, we lose movement capability. She climbed to 300 feet and surveyed the tactical map forming in her vision. Red markers bloomed where dragons landed. Yellow zones indicated evacuation routes. Green dots represented hero deployments too few and scattered too thin. They weren't fighting an army. They were trying to stop a flood with sandbags. "Steve," she transmitted, "we need force multiplication. Where's the rest of the roster?" Reed's at the Baxter building coordinating with SHIELD. Spider-Man's got Midtown. Sam and Natasha are securing the bridges. Thor's... Static interrupted. When Steve's voice returned, it carried strain. Thor's airborne, trying to break through the dome with lightning. No success yet. Carol watched a dragon tear through an apartment building's facade. People jumped from fire escapes. She caught two before they hit pavement, deposited them with a cluster of survivors, and returned for more. Each trip took seconds, but seconds accumulated into minutes, while dragons multiplied. Tony's minefield activated in Battery Park. The detonation sequence lit the southern sky, converting Kree and Skrull salvage into shaped charges. Plasma warheads designed for starship hulls met dragon biomass in a cascade of explosions that painted the darkness temporary orange. Carol felt the blast wave from Midtown. Status: 112 confirmed kills, Tony reported. His voice remained level, but she heard the disappointment underneath. Sensor sweep indicates approximately 4,000 hostiles still active. The minefield bought us minutes, not hours. A scream cut through the tactical chatter. Carol's enhanced hearing isolated it, pinpointed the source. She found them in an alley off Lexington, 5 people trapped as a dragon's mass flowed down from a rooftop, reaching with pseudopods that moved with predatory intelligence. She interposed herself, taking the impact across her shoulders. The symbiote mass tried to envelop her, cold and hungry. She burned it away with concentrated photon emission, the creature shrieking at frequencies that made windows crack. When it retreated, the civilians ran. One of them, an older man in a business suit now torn and filthy, looked back at her. "What are they?" Carol didn't have an answer that would help. "Get to the garden. Follow the blue lights. Go." She returned to altitude and keyed into command frequency. "We can't sustain this. They're not decreasing fast enough." Strange's voice, heavy with arcane effort, responded. "The dragons are symptomatic, not causal. Somewhere beneath this dome, there's a focal point. Null himself, or a manifestation of sufficient power. Until we address the source, we're fighting the symptom." "Fantastic," Tony said. "Standard God-tier invasion checklist. Locate deity, prevent apocalypse, save survivors, file under Tuesday." Despite everything, Carol felt her mouth twitch. Tony's sarcasm was a defense mechanism, but it was also honest. They'd done this before. Different opponents, same impossible stakes. Then the seismic sensors registered something new. Tony transmitted the data before anyone asked. "Picking up subsurface vibration Atlantic coast. Magnitude indicates something large, very large. One of Namor's leviathans," Steve suggested. "Depth's wrong, temperature's wrong. This is rising from the abyss layer." Tony paused. Carol heard his armor's sensor suite cycling through analysis protocols. Biothermal spike approaching the surface. Radiogenic output. Whatever's down there is generating heat like nothing in our database. Carol descended toward the command post, landing beside Steve. His expression hadn't changed, still focused on triage and tactical deployment, but his grip on his shield adjusted slightly. Combat tension, not fear. "Time frame?" Steve asked. Tony's HUD projected a holographic map between them. Red graduated to white at a point 15 miles offshore. "Breaching within 10 minutes. Maybe less. Strange drew symbols in the air, golden light, tracing geometric patterns. The oceans feel wrong. Not chemically, spiritually. Something primordial is answering. Answering what? Carol asked. The sorcerer's hands stilled. The invasion, the darkness. There are old mechanisms built into this planet. Defense systems older than human language. If they're activating now, explosion cut him off. Not nearby, but massive enough to carry across the city. Carol's head snapped east toward the river. A column of steam rose from the East River, superheated water flash boiling into the artificial night. The column climbed higher than the Empire State Building visible across Manhattan. Carol moved to intercept, but Steve's hand caught her arm. Wait. Let's confirm hostile before engaging. You think it might not be? I think we're already fighting on too many fronts. Steve's tactical mind worked the problem aloud. If this is another threat, we collapse. If it's neutral, we adapt. If it's somehow an asset, we use it. The water continued to boil. Pressure built beneath the surface, visible as a dome of liquid pushing upward. Whatever approached it displaced massive volume. Carol's combat instincts screamed at her to move to intercept, to establish perimeter. But Steve was right. They needed information, not another battlefield. Tony's sensors painted a profile from sonar returns. Estimating height at 350 feet. Mass in the 100,000-ton range. Locomotion is quadrupedal. Spinal protrusions suggest the thing breached. Water exploded outward in a tidal surge that would have capsized anything smaller than a destroyer. The figure rising from the harbor looked carved from nightmares that predated language. Massive beyond reasonable scale, its form combined reptilian anatomy with something older, less categorizable. Plates along its spine caught the emergency lighting and reflected it back wrong, like looking at nuclear fire through dark glass. Carol's tactical overlay struggled to render it. Height estimates adjusted upward twice before settling. The creature's head alone was the size of a city bus jaw capable of swallowing a subway car whole. Water streamed from its body, and where the water fell, the harbor boiled. Godzilla, Tony said, voice flat with the kind of calm that meant he was cycling through crisis protocols too fast for emotion. The sensor data matches. Godzilla has made landfall. Steve's shield was already up, but his stance had shifted from defensive to analytical. Is it with the dragons? Scanning for symbiote markers. Tony's HUD ran biometric comparisons. Negative. Whatever this is, it's separate from Newell's invasion. Biochemistry is completely incompatible. The creature Godzilla waded toward shore. Its movement created waves that rocked boats still moored to piers. Each step registered on seismographs across the city. Carol felt the vibrations through her boots. A dragon descended toward it, tentacles extending. Godzilla's response was immediate and absolute. Its tail swept through the dragon's mass, scattering it. Before the symbiote could reform, the creature's dorsal plates began to glow. Blue light built in intensity, cascading forward along its spine. Its mouth opened. The atomic breath hit like concentrated starfire. Carol had seen planetary bombardment. She'd fought Kree warships. The beam Godzilla projected carried comparable energy output to weapons designed to crack continental plates. The dragon didn't scream. It simply ceased vaporized in less than a second. The beam continued through where the dragon had been carving across the sky, and where it touched the darkness dome, the symbiote material burned. The creature's roar followed. Carol felt it in her chest cavity, a frequency that bypassed her ears and resonated with bone. Buildings shuddered. Car alarms triggered in cascading waves. Every dragon in sensor range oriented toward the sound, recognizing challenge. "Stand by for collision," Tony transmitted. "That thing just declared territory. The hive's going to respond." He was right. dragons diverted from their positions across Manhattan, converging on the harbor. Dozens of them moving with coordinated purpose that confirmed Strange's assessment about unified consciousness. Godzilla stepped onto Manhattan proper. Its foot came down on a warehouse, crushing the structure into rubble. Another step took it into an abandoned parking garage. The building groaned and collapsed. The creature didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the destruction, just continued forward with the inexorable momentum of a glacier walking. Steve was already moving. Evacuation teams fall back to secondary positions. All units establish containment around the harbor district. We've got 2 threats converging. 3, Strange corrected. Null's invasion, Godzilla, and the civilian population caught between them. Carol lifted into the air, positioning herself between the approaching creature and the nearest evacuation corridor. Below, people ran. Above, dragons fell. And from the harbor, something ancient and uninterested in human concerns walked toward the heart of the city. The tactical situation had just transformed from catastrophic to impossible. "New plan," Tony said. "We survive the next hour. After that, we improvise." Carol watched Godzilla's dorsal plates cycle through another charging sequence. The blue glow built, reflected in 1,000 shattered windows. More dragons approached, and the creatures seemed to notice them, the way a person might notice mosquitoes with absolute certainty they would be dealt with. "Steve G saw nice she transmitted. "I don't think it's here for us. Doesn't matter if we're not the target. The collateral alone will level blocks." Steve's voice carried the weight of command decisions that had no good answers. Containment first, evacuation second. We'll address motivation if we survive long enough to ask questions. Godzilla's next step crushed a line of parked cars flat. Its tail demolished a street lamp, and its attention fixed on the mass of dragons descending from the unnatural night above Manhattan. Carol calculated trajectories, estimated blast radii, and accepted the mathematics. They were fighting in a city full of 8 million people, while a walking disaster and an alien god's army used the streets as an arena. "Copy that," she said, and prepared for impact. Y'all, the way this chapter went from 0 to 100 is actually insane. First off, huge respect to Captain Marvel, but watching her fly Mach 4 into that dome and bounce off Bestie, that had to hurt. The sky literally said, "Access denied." But the real tea? Yeah, it's Godzilla. He really woke up from his nap and saw an alien invasion and said, "Absolutely not in my neighborhood." The way he walked out of the ocean was peak-like main character energy. Iron Man is over there, worry about math, and Godzilla is just vibing and destroying the city infrastructure by accident. And that fight, if you can call it that. That poor symbiote dragon tried to square up and got cooked. Literally vaporized. Godzilla didn't even flinch. He just hit delete on that dragon and poked a hole in the roof for good measure. We are watching a Godzilla versus Venom cage match, and the Avengers are just stuck in the front row trying not to get squashed. I am grabbing my popcorn immediately. Abigail Brand watched Earth die from 200 miles up. The peak's observation deck offered unobstructed view of planetary catastrophe. What had been a living world, with weather patterns and atmospheric gradients, now resembled a specimen preserved in black amber. The symbiote encasement wrapping the planet reflected no starlight. Sensors struggled to penetrate its surface, returning data that made no sense in conventional physics. "Thickness," Brand asked, without turning from the viewport. Her tactical officer checked readings for the 3rd time. "Variable. Ranges from 800 meters at the poles to 2 kilometers at equatorial latitudes. Composition defies standard analysis. It's organic, but the molecular structure keeps shifting." Her jaw tightened. She'd coordinated responses to Kree invasions, Skrull infiltrations, and Shi'ar incursions. This was different. Those had been armies with logistics chains and command hierarchies. The things surrounding Earth operated on principles closer to weather systems than warfare. Communication status, severed. No signals penetrating the barrier in either direction. We're isolated from ground teams. The officer paused. Ma'am, atmospheric analysis indicates the shell is consuming solar radiation. Earth's receiving approximately 3% normal sunlight. Temperature projections suggest I can do math. Brand turned from the viewport, her expression carved from ice. How long until we're looking at ecosystem collapse? 72 hours before agricultural failure becomes irreversible. Urban areas will experience critical infrastructure breakdown within 48. That's assuming the barrier remains static and doesn't begin active predation. Through the reinforced windows, Brand watched tendrils of living shadow pulse across the shell's surface like veins carrying poison. The barrier wasn't static. It was breathing. Her comm chirped. Read Richard's signal bouncing through SWORD's relay network from somewhere in Manhattan. Background noise suggested chaos, but his tone remained analytical. Brand, are you seeing the structural coherence patterns? She pulled up the scan overlay. Mathematical formulae scrolled across her vision, Reed's work already integrating with SWORD's sensor data. The shell exhibited geometric regularity at scales ranging from micrometers to continental spans. Fractal architecture self-similar across magnitudes. Confirmed. Explain the implications in terms I can weaponize. Reed's response came with the weight of someone delivering bad news to a patient who wouldn't accept platitudes. The barrier is a single organism, possibly the largest discrete biological entity ever recorded. It's not containing Earth. It's digesting the concept of isolation itself. Every photon it absorbs, every electromagnetic signal it blocks, strengthens the overall structure. Weaknesses, static filled the line. When Reed spoke again, his words carried careful precision. I've identified points of structural convergence. Think of them as load-bearing nodes in an architectural sense. The organism maintains coherence through distributed processing, but certain junctions appear critical. Disrupt enough nodes simultaneously, and theoretical models suggest cascading destabilization. Brand pulled up tactical displays showing Manhattan's street grid overlaid with thermal signatures. Multiple hotspots indicated combat. One signature burned hotter than any conventional weapon system. Richards explained the anomalous thermal reading off the East River. SWORD sensors registered a radiogenic spike consistent with... She checked the database. Nothing in our threat assessment catalog. The pause stretched longer than comfortable. That would be Godzilla Manhwa, Reed said finally. Classified as a Titan-class organism. Predates human civilization. Current behavior suggests autonomous response to the symbiote incursion. Brand had seen the preliminary reports. Footage from street-level cameras showed something that violated comfortable assumptions about terrestrial biology. Height estimates kept revising upward. Mass calculations made her question whether Manhattan's bedrock could support the load. Threat classification: unknown. It's not cooperating with the symbiote forces. Analysis of engagement patterns indicates... Weapon discharge echoed through Reed's comm. Hold on. The line went silent except for ambient noise. Screaming. Explosions. The particular resonance of symbiote biomass burning. Brand waited, watching satellite feeds struggle to penetrate the shell enough to provide even degraded imagery of the surface. Reed returned. Sorry, where was I? Godzilla's threat profile. Right. It's eliminating symbiote organisms with extreme prejudice. Collateral damage to urban infrastructure is extensive, but the pattern suggests target prioritization rather than indiscriminate destruction. Think of it as an immune response. Earth's defending itself through a mechanism we didn't know existed. Brand processed that. Immune response implied recognition, which implied intelligence, which implied potential communication. Or it meant anthropomorphizing a natural disaster, which was how tactical officers got people killed. Can we redirect it? I wouldn't recommend trying. Reed's tone suggested he'd already run those calculations. Preliminary analysis of its biomechanics indicates output capability that would challenge heavy orbital platforms. Attempting to control or constrain it would likely result in exactly the confrontation we're trying to avoid. Through the viewport, Brand watched the shell pulse. Somewhere beneath that living ceiling, 8 million people were trapped with a god's invasion force and a walking geological event. Standard protocols had no answers for this configuration. Give me the nodes, she said. Coordinates estimated structural integrity, optimal strike pattern. If we're hitting this thing, I want maximum effect from minimum exposure. Reed transmitted data. Brand's tactical display populated with markers scattered across Manhattan and surrounding boroughs. 12 primary nodes, 47 secondary targets. The pattern formed a web with Grand Central Terminal at its approximate center. Notice anything? Reed asked. Brand had. The nodes are clustering around areas of highest symbiote activity. They're reinforcing where resistance is strongest. Exactly. Which means the organism is adapting in real time. It identified Godzilla as a threat and began fortifying regions the Titan is likely to engage. We're not fighting a static barrier. We're fighting something that learns. The implications cascaded. Static defenses could be analyzed and breached. Adaptive systems required entirely different approaches. You didn't break an adaptive system. You made it adapt in directions that weakened rather than strengthened it. How's Dr. Strange reading the mystical component? More weapon discharge. Reed's breathing had changed the shallow rhythm of someone fighting while thinking. Stephen believes the shell has metaphysical properties beyond its physical manifestation. He's working on that angle, but his assessment is that conventional sorcery isn't sufficient. The manifestation generating this field predates most magical traditions. It's operating on principles that don't recognize human-defined boundaries between science and mysticism. She pulled up historical files. The name Knull appeared with security clearances she didn't have. She overrode them. God of symbiotes. Primordial darkness given consciousness. Threat assessment rated apocalyptic. So we're fighting something that predates light itself. It's wrapped our planet in living shadow. And our best response is hoping a giant lizard with nuclear breath tilts the odds. Brand's voice carried no inflection. She'd learned long ago that emotion didn't improve tactical situations. Fantastic. There's one more variable, Reed said. The barrier is reacting to Godzilla's atomic emissions. Not just damage response. The entire structure appears to recognize that energy signature as antithetical to its nature. Where Godzilla burns through symbiote tissue, the surrounding biomass shows signs of necrosis extending well beyond the immediate blast radius. Radiation poisoning, more fundamental than that. The atomic breath seems to carry properties that destabilize biomass cohesion at a molecular level. It's not heat or kinetic force, it's energetic incompatibility, like introducing matter to antimatter, but slower. Brand filed that under potentially exploitable. If Godzilla's emissions disrupted symbiote integrity, then concentrating those emissions at structural nodes might achieve better results than conventional weapons. The problem remained directing a force of nature toward specific tactical objectives. The observation deck's lighting flickered. Emergency protocols engaged backup systems compensating for whatever had just stressed the peak's power grid. Brand checked status displays. The membrane had extended tendrils toward SWORD's orbital position, probing their defenses. We're being tested, her tactical officer reported. The barrier is reaching for us. Current projections give us 18 hours before it establishes contact with the station. She made the calculation instantly. 18 hours meant SWORD would fall before Earth's ecosystem collapsed. The entity below was prioritizing threats based on capability to resist. Smart, ruthless. Exactly what she would do. Begin evacuation protocols, she ordered. Non-essential personnel to escape pods. Combat staff remains on station. If we're abandoning the peak, we're doing it with guns firing. She reopened the channel to read. Richard's SWORD's operational window just collapsed to under a day. Whatever you're planning groundside, accelerate the timeline. We'll provide orbital support as long as physically possible, but don't count on us for extended operations. Understood. Reed paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man stating facts he wished were different. Abigail, if we can't break this barrier from inside, there won't be anything left to evacuate to. Every nation with orbital capability is cut off from their homeworld. We're looking at the potential end of human civilization as a spacefaring species. Then make sure you break it. Brand terminated the connection and turned to her tactical officer. I want targeting solutions for every node Richards identified. Prepare kinetic impactors, particle beams, and whatever else we can throw at this thing. If we're going down, we're taking pieces of it with us. The officer saluted and moved to comply. Brand returned to the viewport, watching Earth rotate beneath its shroud. Somewhere down there, Strange was probably meditating on cosmic implications. Rogers was organizing evacuations with the efficiency that made him legend. Stark was building something desperate and brilliant, and Godzilla was doing what millions of years of evolution had designed it to do. She pulled up the footage again. The Titan wading through harbor water dorsal plates, cycling blue fire, ancient eyes reflecting nothing that resembled human concern. It had emerged from depths humanity had never successfully mapped, answering a threat that shouldn't exist by rules that predated language. Brand had spent her career managing the interface between Earth and cosmos. She understood that humanity's position in the universal hierarchy was more fragile than most people wanted to acknowledge. They weren't the apex. They'd never been the apex. They were just clever enough to occasionally avoid being crushed by the things that actually mattered at cosmic scales. This time, something else was doing the crushing for them. She watched Godzilla's thermal signature bloom across her display. The Titan had moved deeper into Manhattan, leaving a trail of destruction that would take decades to rebuild. Hive extensions converged on its position in numbers that would have overwhelmed any conventional force. The Titan didn't care about numbers. It cared about eradication. She keyed her comm to broadcast across all SWORD channels. All stations, this is Director Brand. We have confirmed apocalyptic class threat. Entity designation canon. Associated forces have established planetary quarantine. Ground teams are engaged with primary threat and collateral Titan-class organism. SWORD's mission is to maintain orbital observation and provide fire support until such time as the barrier extends to our position. At that point, we fight until we can't. No extraction, no surrender. If Earth falls, we fall with it. Brand out. She closed the channel and allowed herself 5 seconds of purely human reaction. Fear. Anger. The bitter knowledge that everything she'd built her life around protecting might end in the next 72 hours. Then she locked it down and became Director Brand again. The living shroud pulsed. Godzilla burned. And somewhere in the living darkness, Newell's attention turned toward the planet he'd come to claim. Ma'am, her tactical officer called out. We're detecting structural changes in the barrier. The nodes are shifting position. It's adapting to the Titan's movement pattern. She studied the display. The web of critical junctions was reorganizing, concentrating defensive mass along projected paths Godzilla might travel. The entity wasn't just reacting. It was anticipating. How long until it completes the adaptation? Estimating 4 hours at current rate. After that, the Titan's effectiveness may be significantly reduced. 4 hours. Brand pulled up chronometer displays showing time since initial invasion. They were 3 hours in. The organism had learned enough about Godzilla in 3 hours to begin countering it. She opened another channel this time to Strange's mystical frequency. The Sorcerer Supreme answered immediately, his voice tight with concentration. "I'm occupied, Director. Make time. The shell is adapting to neutralize Godzilla. Can you buy us time? Slow the adaptation process?" Strange's response came between syllables of incantation she couldn't parse. The entity's learning capability operates on principles that bypass conventional temporal manipulation. I can attempt to obscure Godzilla's pattern, make its movements less predictable to the hive's analytical processes. But understand doing so means accepting that the Titan becomes even more unpredictable to us as well. Brand weighed the variables. Predictable Godzilla that would be neutralized in 4 hours, or unpredictable Godzilla with extended operational effectiveness. The math was brutal, but clear. Do it. We need the Titan functional longer than we need it controlled. Your faith in chaos is noted. Strange paused. And pragmatic. I'll begin the obscurement ritual. Be advised this will strain my ability to maintain other defensive structures. Casualties may increase in sectors I'm currently protecting. Another impossible choice. Brand had stopped counting those around the 2nd hour. Acceptable. Focus on keeping Godzilla in play. Everything else is secondary. She terminated the connection and watched her displays populate with updated casualty estimates. Numbers climbed. Infrastructure damage assessments painted red across entire neighborhoods. Economic impact calculations exceeded her authorization level to even view without special clearance. None of it mattered if the shell held. Her tactical officer looked up from his console, face pale. "Director, we're detecting movement in the barrier's upper atmosphere. Something massive is descending from the outer membrane." Brand's blood went cold. "No, unknown. Biomass signature is consistent with hive material, but the scale is..." He stopped recalculating. "Ma'am, if this reading is accurate, we're looking at a single entity massing approximately 40,000 tons. It's not a dragon. It's what happens when hundreds of them merge." The viewport showed it now. A nightmare made tangible descending through the artificial darkness toward Manhattan, where individual symbiote organisms moved with predatory grace. This thing moved like geology. Inevitable. Unstoppable. Brand pulled targeting solutions, knowing before she ran the calculations that SWORD's weapons wouldn't be sufficient. You didn't kill mountains with rifles, but you could make mountains bleed. "All weapon systems," she commanded. "Target the descending mass. Fire on my mark." The peak's armament came online. Particle beams that could crack asteroids. Kinetic impactors traveling at relativistic speeds. Everything SWORD had designed for protecting Earth from cosmic threats now aimed at something cosmic that had come calling. Brand watched the entity descend. Watched Godzilla's thermal signature burn bright in the city below. Watched the shell pulse with malevolent life. She thought about Roger's unwavering moral center, Strange's acceptance of cosmic horror, Reed's brilliant analytical mind, Stark's refusal to accept impossible as answer. And she thought about the Titan that had risen from the abyss, older than all of them, operating on logic that predated civilization itself. The question wasn't whether humanity would survive the next 72 hours. The question was, what would be left of the world if they did? Mark Brand said, and the peak opened fire. Okay, first of all, Abigail Brand. Absolute queen behavior. She is watching the literal apocalypse from space, and instead of panicking, she's just annoyed. She really looked at the end of the world and said, "Not on my watch." But the craziest part, Reed Richards confirming that Godzilla is basically Earth's white blood cell. Imagine getting sick, and instead of a fever, your body produces a giant radioactive dinosaur to punch the virus. That is the most metal thing I have ever heard. And the aliens, to be honest, they are total sore losers. They realized they couldn't beat Godzilla fair and square because he kept burning their faces off. So what do? They try to drop a 40,000-ton slime ball on his head. That is so rude. And the ending is kinda cool too. Brand realizing she's about to die and deciding, you know what? If I'm going down, I'm firing every single laser I own at that slime ball. That is the level of petty I aspire to be. She really said, I'm taking you with me, and I respect it. The web line snapped. Peter Parker twisted mid-fall, fired replacement silk at a fire escape that wasn't there anymore and hit asphalt rolling. His spider sense had been screaming for the last 20 minutes, a constant white noise of danger from every direction that made isolating specific threats nearly impossible. He came up running, mask torn at the temple, and nearly collided with a family trying to navigate the chaos. A father carried a daughter no older than 6. The mother dragged a grandmother who couldn't move fast enough. All of them had that hollow-eyed look of people whose world had ended and refused to stop ending. Blue lights. Peter gasped, pointing. Follow the blue markers. Cap's got people at the garden. Go. They ran without thanking him. Nobody thanked anyone anymore. Survival had replaced courtesy 3 hours ago. Peter's comm crackled. Not Avengers frequency. This was the emergency band every hero with a mask and good intentions monitored. Multiple voices overlapped, most of them panicked. There's swarm at Columbus Circle we need. Building's coming down, I can't hold. Where the hell is Strange? We've got civilians trapped in. A roar cut through every frequency, not transmitted, not electronic. The sound bypassed technology entirely and resonated through bedrock up through concrete into Peter's chest cavity. His ribs vibrated. His teeth ached. The family he'd just redirected stopped running and looked back toward the harbor. Peter looked too. The Colossus had reached Tribeca. Distance made it look almost manageable, like something that existed on the same scale as buildings and bridges. Then it stepped over a warehouse, and perspective reasserted itself. The structure disappeared beneath 1 foot. The next step obliterated a parking structure. Debris fountained upward in slow-motion arcs that would come down on everything within 2 blocks. Dorsal plates blazed blue fire against the artificial night. The glow built cascaded forward along the creature's spine like a countdown to detonation. Peter's spider sense shrieked. He grabbed the nearest solid object, a mailbox, and wedged himself behind it. The atomic breath carved across the skyline. Heat washed over Peter's position, superheating air until his lungs burned. The beam didn't just destroy the symbiote mass in its path. It erased the concept of matter occupying that space. Where hive extensions had been forming a living wall across Canal Street, there was suddenly nothing. Not ash, not debris, just absence. The beam continued upward, struck the living ceiling overhead, and burned a hole. Actual sunlight lanced through the gap. Real afternoon sun, golden and impossible, and gone within seconds as the barrier's biomass flowed to seal the wound. But for that brief moment, Peter saw blue sky. Then the dragons came, not the scattered individuals from before. This was coordinated assault hive intelligence, directing every movement. They descended in spirals, layers upon layers of living shadow, converging on the threat their master had identified. The ancient thing didn't slow. Its tail swept through the first wave, scattering biomass that tried to reform midair. Claws the size of cars tore through a second cluster. The third wave hit from above, tentacles wrapping around dorsal plates, trying to smother the energy building there. It was like watching ants try to bring down an elephant. Except these ants could fly, regenerate, and coordinate with geometric precision. Peter webbed toward higher ground, looking for vantage that would let him actually help, instead of just witness. A dragon peeled off from the main swarm and dove at him. He fired webbing into its mass, felt the silk dissolve on contact with symbiote tissue, and barely dodged tentacles that would have punched through his ribcage. "Little busy here," he shouted at no one in particular, flipping over another attack. Then Strange was there. golden mandalas spinning between Peter and the pursuing creature. The mystic shields held for perhaps 3 seconds before the symbiote simply flowed around them like water finding cracks. "Shields are failing," Strange stated, voice tight with effort. "The hive adapted. What worked an hour ago is now decorative." Peter landed beside the Sorcerer Supreme on what remained of a brownstone's roof. "So what's the plan?" "Because from where I'm standing, that thing," he pointed at the Titan carving through lower Manhattan, "is doing more damage than the dragons ever could." Wrong calculation? Strange drew new symbols, these ones darker, edged with crimson. The dragons are establishing infection nodes. Left unchecked, they convert living tissue to hive mass. The Titan is disrupting that process through overwhelming force. By stepping on half the city. Yes. Strange's hands never stopped moving, layers of defensive geometry building and collapsing as symbiote pressure tested each configuration. "Do you see the distinction?" Peter watched a building collapse as the Leviathan's shoulder brushed against it. "Seeing it, not loving it. I'm not asking you to love it. I'm asking you to understand that we're fighting in a system with rules we didn't write." Strange's eyes never left the Titan. That thing is older than human language. It's operating on imperatives that predate civilization. We can't negotiate with it. We can't redirect it. We can only account for it. Another roar split the air. The Colossus had accumulated enough symbiote mass on its back that movement was becoming labored. Dragons layered themselves 3 deep, adding weight, restricting motion. The ancient thing compensated by simply pushing through a row of storefronts, using architecture itself to scrape away the biomass coating its hide. Civilians scattered from the path. Most made it. Some didn't. Peter's fists clenched. "There has to be something we can do." "We are doing it." Strange gestured and Peter saw it. Avengers scattered across the battlefield, not fighting the Titan, but working around it. Captain America, directing evacuation, flows ahead of projected paths. Iron Man's armor creating barriers that channeled fleeing crowds away from collision zones. Carol Danvers pulling survivors from buildings before they collapsed. They weren't defeating anything. They were salvaging what they could while Titans fought. The Colossus shook itself, a full-body motion that sent symbiote mass flying in every direction. Chunks of hive material hit buildings, streets, vehicles. Where it landed, it tried to take root, seeking living tissue to convert. Peter webbed civilians away from the nearest impact point, but there were too many fragments, too much area to cover. Strange's shields caught what they could. Golden light flared and failed, each iteration weaker than the last. "Stephen." Peter's voice dropped. "You're running out." "I'm aware." The sorcerer's hands trembled. Blood dripped from his nose, ignored. "But until I'm out, I'm in." The ancient thing advanced up Broadway, leaving a trail of destruction that would take decades to rebuild. Each step was calculated precise in the way avalanches were precise, following paths of least resistance, while obliterating everything in those paths. And the dragons kept coming. They'd change tactics. No more attempting to kill or contain. Now they just slowed, wrapped around legs to reduce stride length, covered eyes to limit targeting, built mass on the back to force a hunched posture. Death by 1,000 cuts, except the cuts were tons of living shadow, and the target refused to acknowledge pain. Peter swung lower, trying to help a cluster of people trapped between collapsed buildings and the advancing combat zone. His web shooters were running low. He'd need to reload soon, but there was no soon. There was only now, stretched into eternity, every second containing lifetimes of desperate choices. A woman screamed. Peter turned and saw her pinned beneath rubble, not from dragon attack, but from the Titan's passage shaking foundations until they gave way. He webbed over, started lifting debris. "I've got you. You're gonna be fine. Just breathe okay. Breathe and..." The Colossus stepped past them, maybe 30 feet away. The shock wave knocked Peter flat. The woman screamed again as rubble shifted. Peter threw himself over her, trying to shield her from the debris. Rain, his spider sense said, was coming. It came. When the dust cleared, Peter was bleeding from a dozen cuts. Ribs definitely cracked, and the woman was unconscious but breathing. He webbed her to his back and started climbing toward the nearest safe zone marker. Halfway there, his comm came alive with Captain America's voice. "All teams, this is Rogers. We're losing cohesion. Fall back to secondary rally points. Repeat, fall back. We can't hold the perimeter against both threats simultaneously." Peter had never heard Steve sound like that. Not defeated. Worse. Accepting. "Spider-Man, what's your position?" Peter checked his mental map against the chaos. "West Village. I've got a civilian heading for evac Corridor 3. Negative. Corridor 3 is about to be overrun. Redirect to Corridor 5. And Peter." "Yeah? Don't try to fight it. Just move people. That's the mission now." The line went silent. Peter swung toward Corridor 5, the woman's weight familiar and terrible on his back. Below, he watched the Colossus tear through a dragon swarm like tissue paper. Atomic fire painted the streets blue. Buildings that had stood for a century crumbled, and the hive kept coming, endless and patient and utterly convinced it would win through attrition. Peter landed on a rooftop, gently lowered the woman, and looked back at the battlefield. This was what losing looked like. Not dramatic last stands, not heroic sacrifices, just incrementally failing to be everywhere at once, while the city came apart around you. His spider sense flared. Peter looked up. More dragons, always more dragons. These ones were heading for the Titan's exposed back, where symbiote layering had created enough mass to theoretically smother the dorsal plate's energy output. They wouldn't succeed. Peter knew that now. The ancient thing would shake them off or burn them away or simply ignore them until they dissolved under sustained atomic radiation. But they'd slow it down, make it destroy more buildings while fighting, create more collateral, and there was nothing Peter could do about it except keep moving civilians and hope the math worked out better than his gut said it would. The woman stirred, groaning. Peter knelt beside her. "Hey, you're okay." "Well, you're not okay, but you're alive, which is currently passing for okay. I'm gonna get you to—" The roar hit again. Closer this time. The whole building shook. Peter looked east and saw the Colossus had turned. Not toward the dragon swarm. Toward something else. Its head tilted dorsal plate cycling through a charging sequence that Peter's hindbrain screamed was wrong. Then he saw what it was looking at. A hive node. One of the structural anchor points Strange had tried to explain earlier. The kind of target that mattered more than individual dragons because it maintained the barrier's integrity. The ancient thing opened its mouth. "Oh no." Peter grabbed the woman. Nope, we are not staying for—" The atomic breath hit the node dead center. The explosion wasn't physical. It was spatial. Reality bent at the impact point symbiote biomass trying to maintain coherence while being systematically destabilized at a molecular level. The barrier overhead rippled a visible wave of distortion spreading from the point of contact. And then it screamed. Not the dragons, not the hive extensions. The barrier itself, the living ceiling wrapping the planet, emitted a sound that made every previous roar seem like a whisper. Peter's spider sense didn't just warn him. It begged him to run to hide, to stop existing near whatever was happening. The ceiling pulsed, throbbed, went dark in sections before illuminating again with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at. It was adapting, learning, prioritizing the Titan as the primary threat, which meant every dragon, every hive extension, every fragment of symbiote biomass in the 5 burrows was about to converge on one target. Peter's comm crackled. Strange's voice barely audible over mystical interference. "All heroes, evacuate combat zone immediately. The hive is consolidating. If you're anywhere near the Titan, When that mass descends, you won't survive the collateral. Peter looked at the sky. It was moving. Actually moving. The ceiling lowering as biomass concentrated, forming a descending wall of living shadow that would crush everything beneath it. He grabbed the woman, webbed to the nearest stable structure, and ran. Behind him, the ancient thing stood its ground. Dorsal plates blazed blue fire. The roar that followed wasn't challenge. It was statement. And the city continued to burn. Okay, fam, I need a serious timeout because Chapter 3 just went crazy. First of all, poor Spider-Man needs a hug because he is fighting dragons with no webs left, and he looks so tired. But the real Godzilla just looked up and blasted a hole straight through the alien sky. He literally punched the roof. We saw the sun for a second. But then the sky screamed, like it actually yelled in pain. That is the creepiest thing ever. Now the aliens are big mad, and they are dropping the whole ceiling on us. I am totally freaking out, but I can't stop watching. General Thaddeus Ross watched Manhattan burn from a command center that had been a high school gymnasium 8 hours ago. Tactical displays covered walls where motivational posters once hung. Satellite feeds showed thermal signatures hot enough to melt steel. Casualty projections climbed in real-time numbers, rendered meaningless by scale. 14 million people in the greater metro area. Current evacuation rates suggested they'd save maybe 40%, if they were lucky. Ross wasn't counting on luck. He counted on ordnance logistics and the chain of command that had kept civilization functional since men first organized into armies. The thing tearing through lower Manhattan operated outside that chain, which made it a problem with a solution. Status on the Jericho batteries. His tactical officer, Colonel Hayes, checked her display. Deployed and locked. Targeting solution is solid. Sonic emitters are online. We're ready to engage on your mark, sir. Ross nodded, studying the footage. The creature Godzilla, according to files that predated his security clearance, moved with deliberate intent. Not random destruction. Target prioritization. It was eliminating concentrations of alien biomass with extreme prejudice while treating human infrastructure as incidental. That word. Incidental. As if 8 city blocks could be collateral damage to something's immune response. What's the latest from Rogers? Hayes pulled up the transcript. Captain America advises against engagement. His assessment is that current operations should focus exclusively on alien threat mitigation and civilian evacuation. He's requested we stand down until he requested. Ross kept his voice level. Did the captain happen to mention what authority he has to request anything from a sitting general? No, sir. Then we proceed as planned. Ross gestured at the display showing concentrated enemy forces. The alien invasion is one variable. We're addressing a different variable. The creature operating without oversight, destroying American infrastructure, displacing millions of civilians. That's not a natural disaster. That's a rogue element. Hayes hesitated. Sir, the scientific teams indicate the creature is actively targeting the alien biomass. Disrupting its operations could reduce the rate at which my city gets leveled. Ross pulled up damage assessments. Entire neighborhoods gone. Landmarks reduced to rubble. Economic impact exceeding the national debt. I don't need it to stop fighting aliens. I needed to stop fighting them here. The door opened. Rogers walked in without invitation, shield still strapped to his back uniform, torn and bloody. Behind him, Stark's armor sparked from a dozen impact points. Neither of them saluted. Ross had expected that. General, Rogers said, voice tight with the kind of control that meant he was barely holding back. We need to talk about your deployment orders. No, we don't. Ross gestured at the displays. You see that's strategic asset positioning. My strategic assets, deployed to protect American lives. Stark's faceplate retracted. By shooting at something that's currently the only thing slowing down the alien horde. That's your protection strategy. My strategy is comprehensive threat mitigation. Ross pulled up the tactical overlay. The creature has destroyed 47% of the buildings in its path. Casualty projections from structural collapse alone exceed 10,000. That's not protection. That's acceptable losses you're willing to pay, because you can't control it. Rogers stepped forward. We're not trying to control it. We're trying not to make things worse. Things are already worse. Ross kept his tone flat factual. Your approach is reactive. Hope it targets the right things. Hope it doesn't step on too many people. Hope the collateral stays manageable. He met Rogers' eyes. I don't plan operations on hope. You plan them on mistakes. Rogers' jaw tightened. You're about to turn a disaster into a war zone. It's already a war zone. Ross gestured at the feeds, showing dragon swarms burning buildings, evacuation corridors clogged with refugees. The difference is I'm bringing discipline to it. Rules of engagement, clear objectives. The creature isn't an ally. It's an uncontrolled element operating in American territory without authorization. Stark laughed, sharp and bitter. You want to ask a walking earthquake for permission slips? I want it redirected away from population centers. Ross pulled up the Jericho specs. Directed energy weapons, sonic disruption, kinetic impactors. Designed to alter course without lethal engagement. We're not trying to kill it. We're establishing that human authority still means something. Human authority. Rogers' voice carried disgust. Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm standing, this is ego. You can't accept that there's something you can't command. Ross held his ground. I accept reality, Captain. The reality is that thing has killed more Americans in 4 hours than the aliens have. The reality is that every minute it operates unchecked, more people die. The reality is that someone has to make the hard calls while you're busy being idealistic. The hard call is accepting we're not in control. Strange materialized in golden light cloak settling around his shoulders. Blood still marked his face from earlier fighting. What you're planning will have consequences you can't predict. Then predict them. Ross gestured at the tactical display. You're the mystic. Tell me what happens if we do nothing. Give me projections, certainties. Strange's expression remained cold. I can tell you what happens if you interfere. You turn its attention toward you. And when something that old decides you're a threat, it doesn't negotiate. It eliminates. Good. Ross tapped the display, highlighting his deployed forces. Then it comes at us instead of civilians. That's called drawing fire. Basic tactics. It's called suicide. Carol Danvers dropped through the ceiling, energy still crackling around her fists. I've fought Kree warships. I've gone toe-to-toe with planetary threats. That thing down there, she pointed toward the harbor. I'm not sure I could stop it if I had to. And you want to poke it with conventional weapons. Ross met her stare. I want to establish parameters. The creature responds to threats. It prioritizes targets. That means it can be influenced, redirected. We make ourselves the bigger threat in this sector. It shifts to address us. We lead it away from civilian concentrations. Or you make it defensive. Rogers moved to the tactical display, studied the deployment. You're setting up in a corridor it's likely to path through. When it sees armed resistance, what do you think happens? It adapts its route. It goes through you. Rogers' finger traced alternate paths on the map. And when it does, all these civilians you're trying to protect, they're in the blast zone. Ross had already run those calculations. Acceptable risk balanced against certain casualties if they did nothing. We maintain escape corridors, evacuate the sector. By the time it reaches our position, civilians will be clear. You don't have time. Stark pulled up chronometer data. Current evacuation rates don't support that timeline. You'll have maybe 60% clear when it arrives. The rest are trapped, and now they're trapped in a kill zone. Then we make time. Ross keyed his comm. All units advance timeline. Engage in 6 minutes. Thaddeus. Roger's voice dropped the tone he used before things became irreversible. Don't do this. Ross looked at him. Saw the weight behind those words. The experience. The losses. Rogers had lived through wars that made modern conflicts look like skirmishes. He'd seen what happened when good intentions met bad tactics. But Rogers had also spent 70 years on ice, while Ross learned that the world didn't stop for idealism. I appreciate your perspective, Captain. But this isn't a debate. It's a briefing. You don't have to like my orders. You just have to stay out of the way. Rogers held his gaze for a long moment. Then he straightened, something settling in his expression that Ross recognized. Decision. Commitment. No, sir, I don't think I will. The room went silent. Hayes's hand drifted toward her sidearm. Stark's repulsors hummed to standby. Strange's fingers moved in preparatory gestures that meant magic was about to get involved. Ross raised one hand, forestalling escalation. You're refusing a direct order from a superior officer. I'm not under your command. Roger's voice stayed level. Never have been. I work with the military when our objectives align. Right now they don't. You're about to trigger a cascade that'll kill more people than you save. I can't let that happen. Can't let? Ross smiled without humor. And how exactly do you plan to stop a military operation in progress? You going to fight your way through my soldiers? Turn this into Captain America versus the United States Armed Forces. If I have to. The certainty in those words carried weight Ross couldn't ignore. This wasn't bravado. Rogers would actually do it. Would actually go through Hayes and her team, dismantle the Jericho batteries, and dare Ross to start a war with Earth's most visible symbol of heroism, while aliens were literally eating the sky. The tactical calculus shifted. Ross ran it cold. Engaging Rogers meant delay, resource diversion, potential morale, catastrophe if footage leaked. Not engaging meant continuing with an operation Rogers was now actively opposed to, which meant the captain would interfere regardless. Stalemate with escalation potential. Ross hated escalation potential. Stand down, he told Hayes, to Rogers. You've got 3 minutes to present an alternative. Make it good. Rogers pulled up the tactical map, started talking evacuation corridors and defensive positioning. Stark added technical specifications. Strange contributed mystical observations that sounded like philosophy, but apparently had tactical relevance. Ross listened, calculated, found the holes in their approach, and there were holes, massive ones, based on assumptions about creature behavior they couldn't prove. But he also found something else. A framework that might possibly reduce casualties if several unlikely variables aligned perfectly. 2 minutes, 50 seconds, and Ross made his decision. No. Rogers stopped mid-sentence. Sir, no. Ross repeated. Your plan requires the creature to maintain current behavior patterns, to prioritize targets the way it has been, to continue treating human forces as non-threats. He gestured at the display. That's not tactics. That's prayer. I don't run operations on prayer, and I don't support operations that guarantee disaster. Rogers' hand rested on his shield. Last chance, General. Stand down. Ross keyed his comm. All units weapons free. Engage the target. What happened next occurred in seconds, but felt slower. Rogers moved. Stark fired. Strange cast. Hayes drew her weapon. The room erupted into controlled chaos as enhanced humans collided with trained soldiers who knew exactly what they were signing up for when they joined Ross's command. Outside, 6 Jericho batteries opened fire. Directed energy beams converged on the creature from multiple angles, designed to overwhelm sensory input without causing lethal damage. Sonic emitters followed frequencies calibrated to disrupt organic tissue function at the cellular level. The creature stopped walking. Ross watched feeds from multiple angles as the target turned dorsal plates beginning to glow. Not the quick charge sequence from before. This was slower. Building. Hayes, now zip-tied and furious on the floor, looked up at him. "Sir, it's facing us." "I see that." "Sir, the civilians are being evacuated." Ross checked the numbers. 78% clear. Not good enough. Never good enough. But better than zero. All units prepare for. The target opened its mouth. Blue fire carved across the skyline, and for a moment Ross understood what Strange had tried to tell him. This wasn't a weapon. This was geology expressing displeasure. The beam hit the easternmost Jericho battery dead center. The installation didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that the concrete beneath it had been converted to glass. The creature stepped forward, not toward the batteries, toward the evacuated sector Ross had cleared for his operation, toward the 22% of civilians who hadn't made it out yet. And behind it, sensing opportunity, the alien swarms began to descend. Not attacking the creature directly anymore, attacking the space it had just vacated, flowing into gaps it created, using Ross's engagement as a distraction to advance their own positions. Ross watched it happen in real time, watched his tactical plan become a tactical disaster, watched the variables he thought he'd controlled reveal themselves as chaos wearing mathematical clothing. On the floor, hands-bound Rogers met his eyes. Said nothing. Didn't have to. Ross keyed the emergency channel. "All units full retreat. Civilians take priority. Abandon equipment if necessary. Get our people out." He turned to Hayes, started to order her release, and realized Stark had already cut her free. The man was helping her up. Repulsors powered down, no gloating in his expression. Just the look of someone who'd seen this play out before. "Prediction," Stark said quietly. "Next time you want to establish human authority over a force of nature, maybe run it by people who fought forces of nature professionally." Ross said nothing. Watched his batteries get systematically destroyed. Watched the creature advance into the sector he'd cleared. Watched civilians die because he'd made them tactical priorities instead of people. Strange spoke from across the room, mystical restraints dissipating. "Some systems predate command structures, General. They don't care about chain of custody. They just correct." Through the window, Manhattan continued burning. But now the fires had authors. Some alien, some ancient, and some, Ross was beginning to understand, entirely human. "All right, y'all. Let's be real for a second." Chapter 4 was actually painful to watch because General Ross fully embarrassed himself, OMG-like, fully. "We have literal superheroes begging this man not to shoot the giant radioactive lizard that is saving us." And Ross really said, "Nah, I know better," which is just wild. The audacity is screaming. Captain America looked at him dead in the eye and dropped the iconic, "No, sir. I don't think I will" line, and I got literal chills. But Ross didn't listen because he hates logic. He really tried to boss around a force of nature, and the find-out phase was immediate, because Godzilla didn't even sweat. He just turned around, saw the army's toys, and hit delete on the whole battalion. He vaporized the weapons in 1 second, and then walked away just to be petty. Now the aliens are everywhere. Everything's on fire, and Ross is just standing there looking dumb, while Tony Stark hits him with the cleanest roast. Maybe ask the professionals next time. Ross really aimed at the king of the monsters and got humbled in 4K. And honestly, I love that for him. Thor struck the first arc at exactly 0347 hours. Lightning carved downward from Mjolnir, white-hot and precise, splitting the night that had been day for too long. The bolt hit symbiote mass, coating the infected Titan's shoulder, and for 1 brilliant second, the living darkness burned. Then it adapted. Aurora Monroe felt the shift through the atmospheric currents she commanded. The alien tissue learned, restructured. What had been vulnerable to electrical discharge 30 seconds ago now channeled it dispersed it, rendered it harmless. "It's not working." She transmitted winds carrying her above the combat zone. "The biomass is insulating." "Then we hit harder." Thunder rumbled in his voice. Mjolnir spun, gathering charge from storm clouds that hadn't existed before Aurora called them. Stark increased the grid output. Far below, embedded in ruined skyscrapers, Stark's experimental emitters came online. Tesla coils built from salvaged Chitauri tech hummed with lethal voltage. The air itself became weapon-ionized and hungry. Lightning struck again and again. A cascading chain of electrical fury that should have stripped flesh from bone. The symbiote blackened, cracked, fell away in chunks, and immediately regenerated. He descended, boots touching rubble that had been a subway entrance. Smoke rose from where his lightning had carved trenches through alien matter. He watched those trenches fill biomass, flowing like water seeking level. "This won't hold it." Aurora landed beside him, hair still crackling with residual charge. "The infection is too deep. We're burning the surface while it roots into..." The host moved, not the shambling gait of something controlled. This was deliberate, ancient. It stepped through a row of buildings that collapsed like sandcastles beneath impossible mass. Dorsal plates glowed beneath parasitic coating blue fire struggling against black prison. Energy built, distorted. The creature tried to vent atomic pressure through its usual channels, but the parasitic layer interfered. Heat had nowhere to go except outward, unfocused wild. A thermal bloom erupted from its back. Not the concentrated beam that had carved precision strikes before. This was dispersal. Radiation washing across 6 city blocks in a wave that made Geiger counters scream. Aurora threw up wind barriers on instinct, deflecting the worst away from evacuation corridors. He raised Mjolnir, grounding what he could through his own body. It hurt. It would have killed anyone less durable. "Stephen," his comm cut through static. "The atomic output is destabilizing. If it breaches containment..." "I'm aware." Strange's voice carried the strain of someone maintaining 17 defensive structures simultaneously. "The infection isn't controlling it. It's crippling it, like throwing a tarp over a reactor." Far below, the captain coordinated ground teams through chaos that had transcended planning. His voice remained steady despite circumstance. "All units fall back to Gamma Perimeter. I repeat, Gamma Perimeter." The exclusion zone just tripled. She watched the host advance. Each step registered on seismographs. Each movement shed alien matter that immediately tried to reattach. The living tissue clung with parasitic desperation, not steering but anchoring. "We need a different approach," she said. "We need a miracle." Mjolnir spun building charge for another strike. "But I'll settle for sufficient voltage." The hammer flew. Lightning followed. The bolt struck dorsal plates directly, trying to burn through the coating to reach the energy source beneath. Alien tissue exploded, vaporized. For a moment, clean blue light shone through. Then the darkness returned thicker than before. The infection had learned from the pain, reinforced, doubled down on the areas that mattered most. "It's protecting the plates," she realized. "The hive knows that's where the threat originates. Then we force it to choose." He gestured and storm clouds gathered tighter. "Stark, concentrate fire on the dorsal ridge. Aurora, I need everything you have. We burn it clean or we don't burn at all." She reached into the atmosphere and pulled. Winds became gale. Gale became hurricane. Lightning danced between her fingers, ready to join the tempest building overhead. Below them, the host stopped walking. Dorsal plates pulsed. Once, twice, building to critical threshold despite the interference coating them. "It's going to fire," Strange transmitted. "Everyone clear the firing line, now." They scattered as the beam erupted. It wasn't the surgical precision weapon they'd seen before. This was scattershot of atomic fury radiation, spraying in a cone that melted steel and turned glass to liquid. The blast carved through the barrier overhead, actually punched a hole in the dome. Sunlight lanced through. Real. Genuine. Lasted maybe 4 seconds before the living ceiling sealed the wound. But in those 4 seconds, the parasitic coating withered. Actual sunlight, unfiltered, hit alien tissue, and it screamed, not audibly, spiritually. Aurora felt it through the winds themselves. Solar radiation, she breathed. That's the weakness. Not lightning, light. We don't have a sun to aim at it. He landed on a rooftop, studied the host as it recovered from its own discharge. The dorsal plates dimmed, cycling down. The infection crept back across scorched areas, slower now, but inevitable. She pulled up overlays. Stark's grid, her storm pattern, his strike points. None of it mattered if they couldn't generate actual solar output. Tony, she transmitted, the arc reactor. Could you modify it to emit solar spectrum? Already running calculations. His voice came back immediate. Problem is output. I'd need to overload the reactor to get enough UV, and at that range, it'd cook me before it cleared the infection. What if you weren't carrying it? Pause. Then, you want me to turn the reactor into a bomb. A very specific bomb. I love terrible ideas. She could hear him already working. Give me 3 minutes. 3 minutes while the host waded deeper into Manhattan. 3 minutes while alien mass thickened across its back, forming layers, structures almost architecture. The parasitic armor was evolving from coating into integration. Strange materialized beside them in a cascade of golden sparks. Blood marked his face from earlier exertion. The hive is testing limits, he said without preamble. It's trying to complete a circuit, link the Titan's energy output to Null's will. Can it? She asked. I don't know. I don't think Null knows. He watched the host move, expression grim. But if the circuit closes, if that thing becomes an extension of the hive's intelligence rather than Earth's immune response. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Mjolnir hummed with barely contained power. Then we ensure the circuit stays open. By force, if necessary. Force has limits. The captain's voice cut through their comms. I'm watching it shrug off everything we throw at it. The question isn't, can we hurt it? The question is, should we? Explain. We strip the infection, great. Then what? It's still tearing through the city. Still killing people just by existing near them. The parasitic layer isn't the problem, it's a symptom. She saw the terrible logic. Remove the coating, the host remained. Leave the coating, the host became something worse. Either way, people died. Tony, she transmitted. How's that bomb coming? 90 seconds. But Aurora, this is one shot. If it doesn't work, I'm out of arc reactor and you're out of ideas. Then it has to work. She descended winds, carrying her toward the projected path. He followed, lightning crackling around him. Strange hung back, maintaining his network of defensive barriers that were the only thing keeping casualties from becoming catastrophic. The host sensed them. Or perhaps the infection did. Either way, attention shifted. Dorsal plates began to glow again, charge building. It's learning our patterns, Professor, he observed, anticipating. Good, she said. Let it anticipate this. She hit the corrupted mass with everything she had. Not lightning, wind. Pure kinetic force channeled through atmospheric pressure. The gale struck like a physical wall, actually staggered the host mid-step. He followed with Mjolnir, not throwing lightning, but using the hammer itself as projectile. It struck the black crown, forming across the dorsal ridge, shattered layers of alien tissue, and returned to his hand. The infection reeled, adapted, started armoring against physical strikes instead of electrical. Now Tony! Stark's armor descended from above arc reactor, removed from the chest housing held in gauntleted hands. He'd rigged it to overload to dump every joule of stored energy into a single pulse of solar spectrum radiation. Clear the blast zone, he transmitted. This is going to be bright. They retreated. Stark hovered directly above the host reactor, aimed downward. "Hey, big guy," he said, voice steady despite the insanity of what he was about to do. "Let's see how you handle a miniature sun." The reactor detonated. Type asamasa. Light, pure and terrible and clean. UV radiation at intensity that would have given unprotected humans lethal burns. The pulse washed over the corrupted mass, and the infection screamed again, this time audibly. The black crown cracked, peeled, fell away in sheets that dissolved before hitting the ground. Dorsal plates emerged clean, glowing blue and unobstructed for exactly 6 seconds. Then the darkness returned, not from reserves already coating the host. From above. The dome itself opened, pouring reinforcements down in a column of living shadow that landed on the massive back and immediately began rebuilding what the solar pulse had destroyed. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not..." The hive wasn't trying to control the host anymore. It was protecting it, preserving it, keeping it functional not as puppet, but as asset. As something too valuable to let the defenders cleanse. He saw it too. Null isn't conquering it, he's claiming it. The implications cascaded. If the god of symbiotes had decided this ancient thing was worth keeping intact, worth defending, worth wrapping in layer after layer of parasitic tissue, "We can't win this fight," Strange said quietly through the comm. "Not here. Not now. The hive has infinite biomass to throw at the problem. We have limited power and time. The math doesn't work." "Then we change the math," the captain said. "Pull back, all teams. We're not engaging directly anymore." "Steve," she started. "That's an order. Save who we can save. Let the monsters fight each other. We'll address what's left when the dust settles." She wanted to argue. Wanted to insist they could still cleanse the infection if they just tried harder, pushed further, sacrificed more. But she'd lived long enough to recognize when determination became delusion. "Confirmed," she transmitted, disengaging. He hesitated, then nodded. Lightning still danced around Mjolnir, but he made no move to throw it. Below, the host continued its march. Black crown thick and layered across its dorsal ridge. Atomic fire glowing beneath the corruption, fighting against the prison containing it, and behind it, around it, protecting it like an honor guard, alien extensions formed patterns that looked almost deliberate. For the first time, Earth's immune response wore the enemy's crown, and no one knew what happened next. "Okay guys, grab your popcorn because Chapter 5 absolutely stressed me out. Like, emotionally damaged me." First Thor and Storm really said, "Yeah, let's cook him," and started blasting Godzilla with lightning like they were trying to turn him into a rotisserie chicken. And the alien goo. It basically put on a rubber suit and went, "Try harder, sweetie." The disrespect was insane. But then, it's Tony Stark. This man really looked at his own chest and said, "I don't actually need this to live right," and proceeded to drop a literal mini-sun on Godzilla. Absolute madman behavior. We love a reckless king. For about 6 seconds, Godzilla was clean. No goo, no mess. And for those 6 beautiful seconds, we thought, "Oh, wow. We actually won." And then the sky said, "Absolutely not." The dome just opens up and dumps a whole bucket of dark alien sludge right back onto his back like it was nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, too. And here comes the plot twist, because now the aliens aren't even fighting Godzilla anymore. They're protecting him, guarding him, using him like a walking battery. That's just too toxic boyfriend energy, honestly, guys. Captain America takes one look at this whole situation and goes, "Yeah, no, we're leaving." And honestly, because how are you supposed to fight a giant lizard when he's wearing the sky as a backpack? I am stressed. Very stressed now, ha ha. The contaminated Colossus reached the harbor at dawn, that would never come. He watched from depths that would crush surface vessels, pressure meaningless against Atlantean physiology. Above him, the infected Titan waded through Shallow's black crown, thick across its dorsal ridge. Alien matter trailed in the water like oil dispersing into currents that carried xenocontamination toward his kingdom. Unacceptable. He rose through thermal layers, breaking surface tension without effort. Water streamed from his shoulders. Wings at his ankles spread, catching air that tasted wrong. The sky remained dark, choked by the living barrier that had turned Earth into a specimen jar. The corrupted Leviathan noticed him. Or perhaps it noticed everything within territorial range and simply prioritized threats. Those ancient eyes held no recognition, no acknowledgement, just the cold assessment of a force that predated language. Good. Namor had no interest in diplomacy with disasters. "Imperious Rex," he said to the darkness and dove. The ocean answered. Atlantean forces moved through the depths below, coordinated by signals only they could perceive. Hydrostatic weaponry charged. Sonic arrays oriented. They would not engage directly. That would be suicide. But they could shape the battlefield, and in shaping it, control where the fighting occurred. He swam beneath the massive form, studying how alien tissue behaved underwater. It dispersed, struggled to maintain cohesion against currents. The alien matter was designed for terrestrial environments, for spreading across surfaces and through air. Water was hostile medium, which meant the ocean itself was weapon, he gestured. Atlantean warriors triggered the first array. Pressure waves struck the infected mass from below, powerful enough to shatter reinforced hulls. The creature staggered, equilibrium disrupted. Parasitic coating peeled away from its legs, unable to maintain grip against hydrostatic force. It adapted its stance, planted feet more firmly, continued advancing. He'd expected that. He signaled the second array. Thermal vents dormant for decades opened on command. Superheated water erupted from the sea floor, creating columns of boiling current that rose like aquatic pillars. The contaminated Leviathan walked into the first column, and the parasitic layer, coating its left flank, simply dissolved. Steam obscured everything for precious seconds. When it cleared, Namor saw clean dorsal plates glowing blue, unobstructed by parasitic tissue. The Titan's energy output stabilized, focused. Then the hive responded. The dome overhead pulsed. Xeno tissue rained down in concentrations that turned seawater black. The alien biomass hit the ocean surface and immediately began sinking, reaching for the Titan like drowning hands seeking purchase. He called the currents. Deep ocean flow answered his will, cold water rising from abyssal layers to meet the descending contamination. The competing pressures created a barrier of churning violence that shredded symbiote tissue before it could reach the Titan. But the hive learned, adapted, started dropping biomass in patterns that accounted for current resistance finding paths through the turbulence. He needed to move the battlefield, now. Namor surfaced near the Titan's head, close enough to see where black crown met reptilian hide. The fusion point looked almost organic, as if the parasitic layer was attempting integration rather than simple coating. "You do not belong here," he said, knowing it would not respond, not caring. "The surface is theirs, the ocean is mine, and I am closing it." The ancient thing turned its head, looked at him with eyes that had seen continents form, made no sound, no gesture, simply returned attention to the descending contamination. He dove again this time, signaling the full Atlantean deployment. Sonic emitters activated in concert, creating standing waves that turned water into barrier. The Titan found itself surrounded by walls of pressurized sound, unable to advance, without passing through fields that would liquefy organic tissue. It stopped, studied the barrier. Dorsal plates began to glow. Namor swam deeper. He knew what was coming. The atomic discharge hit the sonic barrier, and the ocean screamed. Steam exploded upward in a column that briefly reached the dome overhead. The pressure wave from the blast caught Atlantean warriors who hadn't retreated fast enough, killing 3 instantly. But the barrier held. Redirected. Channeled the beam's energy downward instead of outward into the deep ocean, where pressure could absorb what heat could not. The Titan stepped through the gap it had created and continued seaward. Perfect. Namor watched it move into deeper water, away from the harbor, away from the shallows where surface dwellers could follow. Every step took it further into his domain, further from Manhattan, further from the thousands of humans still trapped in the city above. He cared nothing for their survival, but he cared greatly about where their battles occurred. The surface had its own problems. The ocean would not become their dumping ground for disasters they could not control. The corrupted Leviathan waded into waters that would drown submarines. Alien matter struggled against pressure that increased with every meter of depth. The Black Crown began to fragment pieces, breaking away as water pressure exceeded the tissue's structural limits. It descended into darkness, where bioluminescent life was the only illumination. Namor followed, watching as more parasitic coating peeled away with each meter. At 500 meters, the crown had reduced to scattered patches. At 700, only fragments remained around the dorsal plates. The hive tried to reinforce, poured biomass down from above. But at these depths, the contamination imploded before reaching its target. Water pressure crushed it, shredded it, rendered it harmless. The ancient thing reached the abyssal plain and stopped, turned, looked upward at the distant surface where light used to exist. Namor held position, maintaining distance. He had achieved the objective. The Titan was contained, removed from surface conflicts, stripped of most parasitic coating by the ocean's natural pressure. What remained would be manageable, controllable, or at least predictable. The Titan's dorsal plates glowed bright in the darkness, clean blue fire unobstructed by contamination. Energy built, discharged. The atomic beam carved upward through the water column struck the dome overhead and burned another hole in the living barrier. Sunlight lanced down, real daylight penetrating kilometers of ocean to reach the abyssal plain. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds before the dome sealed itself. But in those 10 seconds, every remaining parasitic fragment withered and died. The Titan stood clean in genuine sunlight for the first time since the invasion began. Then, darkness returned. The Titan remained motionless, as if considering the brief window of solar exposure. Namor watched it, ancient recognizing ancient. Neither king nor subject. Neither ally nor enemy. Just forces that operated on timescales measured in epochs rather than hours. The surface world had its heroes, its politics, its desperate scramble to control what could not be controlled. Down here in the crushing darkness, where pressure could pulp steel, different rules applied. Older rules. The kind that predated civilization and would outlast it. The Titan turned and began walking along the ocean floor, moving parallel to the surface world, but separated from it by kilometers of water. Where it went, Namor could not guess. What it sought, he did not care to know. His responsibility was Atlantis, his kingdom, his ocean, and the ocean was now closed. He surfaced briefly, wings carrying him to where Atlantean scouts maintained perimeter. They reported minimal symbiote contamination in deeper waters. The hive had adapted to terrestrial conquest, not oceanic. Down here it struggled, failed, retreated. The surface war would continue. Humans would fight and die and call for aid that would not come from the depths. Their problems were their own. Namor had protected what mattered, had enforced the boundaries that surface dwellers too often forgot existed. The ocean was not their territory, not their battlefield, not their refuge. It was his, and it would remain sealed until the war above concluded on terms that did not threaten the realm below. He dove again, leaving the contaminated surface behind, returning to Atlantis where water was clean and pressure was honest, and ancient things understood their place in the hierarchy of power. Above the war continued. Below the ocean chose its own terms. Okay, you have to listen because Chapter 6 is serving absolute drama, and I am obsessed. Namor really looked at the alien invasion and said, "Excuse me, pool's closed," which is the level of petty I aspire to be. He didn't even care about saving humans. He just didn't want the alien slime ruining his aesthetic, so he dragged Godzilla to the bottom of the ocean for the most aggressive spa day in history. He literally power washed the lizard with boiling thermal vents until the symbiote fell off. And then Godzilla stood at the bottom of the sea and blasted a hole straight through the sky like he was playing a video game on easy mode. We saw the sun for like 10 seconds, and the aliens were freaking out. But then Namor just looked at us and said, "Okay, have fun dying upstairs," and swam home. He really blocked the whole surface world, and to be honest, that is fucking iconic behavior. Reed Richards found the pattern at 0512 hours, not through conventional analysis. The hive's architecture defied standard physics. But when he overlaid Godzilla's movement tracking with dome stability fluctuations, a correlation emerged that shouldn't exist. Where the walking cataclysm moved, the barrier strengthened. Where it departed, structural integrity degraded. "Stephen," he transmitted, "I need you to verify something impossible." Strange materialized in the Baxter Building's command center, still wearing blood from earlier fighting. His hands moved through diagnostic gestures that traced lines of mystical force invisible to normal perception. "Show me." Reed projected the data. Thermal signatures, seismic readings, dome cohesion metrics. All of it synchronized to a single variable proximity to the contaminated Leviathan. The sorcerer's expression went carefully neutral. "That's not correlation. That's dependence. Explain it to me like I don't have a doctorate in dimensional mechanics." The hive is using it as a stabilizer. Its energy output, its mass, its sheer biological stability, they're acting as an anchor point. Null isn't conquering it. He's grafting his invasion onto it. Tony Stark's voice cut through the channel. "So we've got a god-tier threat using a planetary immune response as load-bearing infrastructure. Fantastic. What happens if we remove the anchor?" Strange's hand stilled. "Cascade failure. The dome collapses, but not cleanly. It'll backlash through every connection point simultaneously. Everyone underneath becomes collateral." Reed studied the numbers, ran simulations, hated every result. "We need the captain." Steve Rogers arrived via Quinjet uniform, torn and scorched. He moved like someone who'd been fighting for days without rest, because he had been. His shield bore fresh dents from impacts that would have pulverized concrete. "Status," Reed explained the anchor mechanism. The dependence. The trap they hadn't recognized until it had already closed. Rogers listened without interrupting his expression, growing heavier with each detail. "So Godzilla staying means Null stays stable. Godzilla leaving means the dome comes apart violently." "Correct. And we can't break the connection without killing everyone underneath." "Also correct." The captain was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command decisions that had no good answers. "Then we don't break it. We hold the line. Keep the situation from getting worse while we find another solution." "There might not be another solution," Strange said quietly. "This is what holding actions look like at cosmic scale. We're not winning. We're preventing total collapse." Carol Danvers descended through the ceiling, energy still crackling around her fists. "I can hit it hard enough to disrupt the connection, force a separation, and kill 8 million people when the backlash hits," Reed said. "The anchor isn't a weak point. It's a load-bearing structure. Remove it, and the whole system fails catastrophically." She looked at him, at Strange, at Rogers. "Then what do we do?" "We adapt." The captain moved to the tactical display, studied the dome's architecture. "If we can't remove the anchor, we work around it. Find the actual weak points. The places where the hive's too thin to maintain integrity. Strange gestured and mystical overlays appeared across Reed's technical schematics. Points of convergence, where magical and scientific analysis agreed. 12 primary nodes, 47 secondary junctions. These are the critical structures, he said. Load-bearing points independent of the anchor. Disrupt enough of them simultaneously, and the dome loses cohesion regardless of stabilization. Tony's hologram flickered into the room. I've got strike packages ready. Shaped charges, energy weapons, everything we've been saving for endgame scenarios. But we need precision. Hit the wrong nodes, we reinforce the structure instead of weakening it. Reed pulled up structural analysis. The nodes are fractal, self-similar across scales. We can't just bomb them. We need surgical strikes at specific points. So we go in personally, Rogers said. Small teams. Coordinated timing. We hit all 12 primary nodes within a 60-second window. 30 seconds, Strange corrected. The hive adapts. We give it longer than that, it'll reinforce whatever we damage. Carol shook her head. 30 seconds to hit 12 targets across Manhattan, with hive forces defending every position. That's not a mission. That's a suicide run. It's the mission we have. Roger's voice carried finality. Reed Tony, I need optimal deployment. Strange, can you provide transport? Portal network is ready. I can place teams within meters of each node. Good. The captain started dividing forces, mentally calculating who went where, who had the best chance of completing their objective before the hive responded. Carol, you take the Grand Central node. Tony, you're on the Chrysler Building junction. Reed, I'll handle the Baxter Building convergence point, the scientist interrupted. It's in my infrastructure. I know the access routes. Strange raised one hand. And the catalyst, it's currently 17 kilometers offshore moving along the continental shelf. If it surfaces during the operation, then we adapt again, Rogers said. But according to Reed's data, the anchor effect works at range. As long as it's within the metropolitan area's extended radius, the dome maintains stability. We can work with that. Reed wasn't so certain. The correlation held in current conditions, but variables could shift. The walking cataclysm operated on its own imperatives. If it decided to move to dive deeper to surface in the wrong location at the wrong time, he pushed the concern aside. They worked with what they had, not what they wished they had. Teams need to move within the hour, he said. The longer we wait, the more the hive reinforces. Rogers nodded. Assemble strike teams. Strange, start opening portals. Tony, I need that equipment distributed. Carol. I know, she said. Hit hard, hit fast, get out. No. The captain's voice was firm. Hit precisely. This isn't about force. It's about timing and accuracy. We're not trying to destroy the nodes. We're trying to disrupt the specific resonance frequencies that maintain dome cohesion. Reed will provide targeting data. The scientist pulled up schematics, highlighted the critical strike points on each node. Specific angles. Precise force applications. Margins of error measured in centimeters. This is going to require perfect execution, he said. Then we execute perfectly. Rogers moved to the tactical board, started marking deployment positions. We've done impossible before. We do it again. Strange drew symbols in the air golden light, forming gateway frameworks. Portals will stay open for exactly 90 seconds after team insertion. After that, the hive will have adapted to block them. Exit windows close whether you're finished or not. Tony's hologram flickered. So we've got 30 seconds to hit the nodes, 90 seconds to extract. Anything goes wrong, we're trapped in a collapsing structure with a very angry hive trying to kill us. That's the operation, Rogers confirmed. Carol looked at the deployment map. At the nodes scattered across a city that had become a war zone. At the tiny windows of opportunity and the catastrophic costs of failure. And if we succeed, if we break the dome, what happens to the anchor? No one answered immediately. Reed ran calculations. Strange consulted forces beyond normal perception. Tony's hologram went still. Finally, the captain spoke. We deal with one disaster at a time. First, we break the cage. Then we address what's inside it. It wasn't reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. It was honest, which in current circumstances was the best they could offer. Strange opened the first portal. Golden light carved a doorway through space, revealing a Manhattan street wrapped in permanent twilight. Hive extensions crawled across buildings like veins of living shadow. Teams move in 5 minutes, Rogers said. Check your equipment. Verify your targeting data. When those portals open, we go hard, and we don't stop until the job's done or we're dead. Reed watched the tactical display update. 12 nodes. 12 teams. 30 seconds to execute a plan that assumed everything went perfectly, in conditions where nothing had gone perfectly since the invasion began. He thought about the anchor. About the walking cataclysm offshore, unaware and uncaring. That its mere existence was holding together a cosmic threat's invasion architecture. About the terrible irony of needing it to stay exactly where it was while they broke everything around it. They finally understood the structure of the trap. Understanding didn't make escape any easier. Strange opened the remaining portals, golden doorways to doom precisely placed and ruthlessly timed. Rogers raised his shield. Avengers, move out! And they went to war against geometry itself. Okay, so let's hold the phone, because Chapter 7 just dropped the biggest plot twist of the season, and my brain is actually melting. So Reed Richards finally does the math, and realizes the aliens are not just fighting Godzilla, they are literally using him. This man is a load-bearing wall. The dome is anchored to the lizard. Null looked at Godzilla and said free real estate and built the whole ceiling on his back. And here is the messed up part. If Godzilla moves even a little bit, the entire thing collapses and everyone inside is instantly deleted. That is not a partnership. That is the most toxic relationship I have ever seen. So now the Avengers have to do the craziest group project ever recorded. They have 30 seconds to hit 12 very specific spots around the city, or it is game over. There is literally no second chance for them guys. And yeah, it is literally a suicide run. And Captain America is standing there, like Avengers assemble, all calm and heroic, while Reed is in the corner fighting for his life with math. We are not fighting aliens anymore. We are fighting geometry. Bestie, the math is not mathing, and I am stressed beyond belief. The portals opened at 0547 hours. 12 golden doorways carved through space, depositing strike teams at nodes scattered across a dying city. Carol hit Grand Central Terminal, moving at combat speed. The Hive had fortified the convergence point with layers of living tissue that pulsed like diseased muscle. She didn't slow down. Photon energy carved through the first barrier. The second. The third adapted, started absorbing her output. She switched tactics, went kinetic, hit it with pure momentum that cracked foundation stone. The node beneath glowed with sickly bioluminescence. Fractal patterns spiraling into depths that hurt to perceive. Reed's data had been precise strike here, this angle, this force application. She drove her fist through the geometric center. Reality screamed. The node shattered. Not physically, structurally. The resonance frequency maintaining its cohesion simply stopped, and the architecture collapsed into itself like a broken soap bubble. 15 kilometers away, Tony reached the Chrysler Building junction. His armor sparked from Hive attacks that had started the moment he'd materialized. Shaped charges deployed on magnetic anchors, positioned according to calculations Reed had verified 3 times. Detonating in 5M, he transmitted, then dove through a window as the charges went off. The node fragmented. Clean break. Surgical precision. He was already moving toward the extraction portal when the Hive response arrived, a wave of living shadow that would have drowned him if he'd been 3 seconds slower. Reed worked alone in the Baxter building, surrounded by equipment he'd built over years of pushing science past reasonable limits. The convergence point here ran through his laboratory's foundation. Destroying it meant destroying everything he'd constructed. He set the charges without hesitation. The detonation took out 6 floors. The node collapsed. Reed portaled out as the building began its slow structural failure. 30 seconds. Across Manhattan, 12 strikes executed within the window. Not perfect, 2 teams took casualties. 1 node required secondary charges, but functional. The fractal network holding the dome stable fractured. The barrier overhead rippled, destabilized, started to collapse. Then Eddie Brock felt the Enigma force choose him, not gradually. The Uni-Power didn't ask permission. It recognized necessity and acted. One moment, Eddie was fighting hive extensions in the ruins of a church. The next, cosmic awareness flooded his nervous system with knowledge that would have burned out a normal mind. He understood the invasion, the anchor, the trap. And he understood that Null was vulnerable now, in this moment with his infrastructure collapsing. The symbiote god stood in the void, where the dome's interior opened to genuine darkness. All black, the necrosword in his hand. Eyes that had seen stars die turned toward the human wearing the universe's power. "You are nothing," Null said. "Not arrogant, factual." "I'm enough," Eddie replied, and attacked with forces that predated language. The battle occurred on planes. Normal perception couldn't track. Cosmic energy against primordial darkness. The Uni-Power didn't fight to destroy it, fought to sever. To cut Null's connection to this reality, this invasion, this anchor. The sword cut back. All black had killed Celestials, had carved through gods. But the Enigma force was older than gods, and it had chosen its vessel for this specific conflict. 17 kilometers offshore, the walking cataclysm surfaced. Whether responding to the dome's collapse or following its own imperatives, it emerged from abyssal depths and began wading toward the city. Black crown fragments still clung to its dorsal ridge despite the ocean's cleansing. Its energy output had stabilized during the underwater period. Now it burned clean and bright. Dragons descended to intercept, not the scattered individuals from before. The hive had learned, adapted. These came in formation coordinated masses designed to overwhelm through weight and numbers. The ancient thing opened its mouth. Atomic fire carved through dragon formations like a blade through silk. The beam swept horizontal, vaporizing everything in its path. Where it touched the collapsing dome overhead, holes burned that wouldn't seal. Sunlight lanced through, real daylight. Genuine solar radiation hitting a city that had been wrapped in darkness for days. The effect on hive tissue was immediate and catastrophic. Dragons withered, burned, fell as blackened fragments that dissolved before hitting the ground. The creature advanced into the shallows, still firing. Still burning holes in the dome. Each breach let in more light. More destruction to the hive's cohesion. Above, Eddie and Null fought through the dissolution. The symbiote god was losing. Not because he was weaker, he wasn't, but because his anchor had become liability. The walking cataclysm's energy output, the very stability that had supported the invasion, now disrupted it. The resonance frequencies were wrong, incompatible, fighting against Null instead of supporting him. "This world is not yours," Eddie said through cosmic power that made his voice echo across dimensions. Null raised all black for a final strike. "No world is mine. I am the void before creation. I do not conquer. I return everything to what it was. Not today." The Uni-Power severed the connection, not violently, precisely. It cut Null's grafted invasion away from Earth's reality with surgical care, then pushed. The symbiote god and his remaining forces, ejected through dimensional barriers, cast back into the void he claimed his home. The dome collapsed, not catastrophically. The anchor's destabilization had already weakened structural integrity beyond recovery. Now it simply fell apart, dissolving into fragments that evaporated in genuine sunlight. The sky returned, blue and clean and impossible after days of artificial night. People in the streets looked up and wept. Heroes stopped fighting, stopped moving, just stared at the thing they'd fought to protect, and had started to forget existed. The ancient thing stopped advancing, stood in the harbor with water steaming around its legs. Dorsal plates glowed blue against the sky. It turned its head, looking at the city it had walked through, the destruction it had caused, the dome it had helped break. Then it dove, not fleeing, not retreating, simply returning to depths where it belonged. The ocean swallowed it whole. Ripples spread across the harbor, then stilled. It was gone. Carol landed on a rooftop, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen cuts that would scar. The extraction portal had closed 30 seconds ago. She'd made it out with 4 seconds to spare. "Status!" Roger's voice came through the comm steady despite everything. "Grand Central Node is down. I'm clear." "Tony." "Chrysler's done. Minor injuries. Building's not happy with me." "Reed." "Baxter Building node destroyed. Structure is compromised but stable for now." One by one, the teams reported in. 9 confirmations. 2 casualties heroes who'd bought their teams time to extract. 3 critical injuries. But the mission complete. Strange's voice cut through. "The dome is gone. Null is expelled. The anchor has departed. We've bought Earth time. Not victory, not triumph. Time. Space to rebuild. Room to grieve. The luxury of continuing to exist." Roger stood in the ruins of what had been a command post, looking at the sky. Real sky. With clouds and everything. His shield was cracked. His uniform was shredded. He'd been fighting for 72 hours straight and felt every minute. "Avengers," he said quietly. "Stand down. Mission complete." Eddie Brock collapsed in the church ruins as the Unipower departed. Venom caught him before he hit the ground, symbiote tissue cushioning the fall. The cosmic awareness vanished, leaving him mortal again. Human again. Alive against all probability. "We did it," Venom said. "We survived it," Eddie corrected. "There's a difference." The symbiote, Ami Satamidio, didn't argue. Across the city, people emerged from shelters, from subway tunnels, from buildings they'd barricaded and prayed would hold. They looked at destruction that would take years to repair, at casualties that would take generations to recover from, at a sky that promised tomorrow might actually exist. Namor surfaced in the harbor wings, carrying him to a rooftop where he could see both city and ocean. The surface world had survived its catastrophe. The depths had remained clean. His kingdom was safe. He watched the water where the ancient thing had vanished, wondered if it would return, suspected it would eventually when the next threat required response. Until then, the ocean was his. The surface was theirs. And neither would forget the cost of the boundary. Reed Richards sat in the ruins of his life's work doing math. Casualty projections, infrastructure damage, economic impact. The numbers were devastating, but they were finite. They had endpoints. That alone was victory of a kind. Strange closed the last portal and allowed himself to collapse. His hands trembled. Blood still marked his face. The defensive structures he'd maintained for 3 days finally dissolved, no longer necessary. The wards were down. The barriers were gone. Earth was exposed again, but Earth had survived. Tony Stark stood in the Chrysler Building's wreckage and looked at his cracked arc reactor. The overload from the solar bomb had damaged it permanently. He'd need to build a new one, add it to the list of everything else that needed rebuilding. His comm crackled. Pepper's voice, alive, safe, asking if he was okay. "Define okay," he said and meant it. The cleanup would take months. The rebuilding would take years. The trauma would last generations. But the sun was shining, the sky was blue, and humanity had time to attempt recovery. They'd held the line against a god. That would have to be enough. Okay, hold on, guys. Chapter 8 just gave us the season finale we deserved, and I am not okay. The Avengers were basically playing a super stressful game, and somehow they pulled it off. Carol Danvers straight up punched reality, which sounds fake but also feels very her. Reed Richards blew up his own house for the mission. His own house. That's crazy, but I respect it. Man was fully committed. But the real highlight was Eddie Brock. He got a huge power-up, turned into Captain Universe, and smacked Knull right back where he came from. That part was so satisfying. And Godzilla, he comes back from his swim blasts. The dome open with atomic fire, lets the sunlight wipe out the aliens, and then just leaves. No speeches. Didn't even stay to celebrate. Just walked back into the ocean like his job was done. The sky is blue again, we all survived. But I'm tired. I need a long nap after that chapter. 3 weeks after the sky returned, General Thaddeus Ross stood in the Pentagon briefing room and delivered his assessment. The entity designated Subject Alpha remains at large. Last confirmed sighting 17 kilometers off the coast of New Jersey, descending to abyssal depths. Current location unknown. Threat level unresolved. The Joint Chiefs listened in silence. They'd read the reports, seen the footage, watched a walking disaster tear through Manhattan while fighting an alien god's invasion force. The casualty numbers alone made it clear this couldn't be filed away and forgotten. Recommendations? The chairman asked. Ross pulled up satellite imagery. Thermal scans of the Atlantic. Sonar maps showing nothing but empty ocean. We develop containment protocols, anti-kaiju response systems. The next time it surfaces, we're ready. The reports indicate it was fighting the symbiote invasion, someone pointed out. That it may have been instrumental in, I'm aware of the reports. Ross kept his voice level. I'm also aware that its presence resulted in 14,000 civilian deaths, $47 billion in infrastructure damage, and the complete destruction of 6 city blocks. Intent is irrelevant when the body count is this high. He advanced the presentation. Schematics for detection networks. Theoretical containment systems. Weapons platforms designed for targets that conventional ordnance couldn't stop. Subject Alpha exists outside human authority, outside control. That makes it a threat regardless of observed behavior patterns. We prepare for the next emergence. We establish response protocols. And if possible, we find a way to ensure it doesn't reach population centers again. The chairman studied the proposals. This will require significant funding. The alternative is waiting for the next disaster and hoping it chooses to fight on our side again. I don't plan operations on hope, sir. The meeting continued for another hour. Debates about jurisdiction, about resources, about whether containment was even feasible for something that had walked through their best weapons without noticing. Ross had heard it all before. After the meeting, when the briefing room emptied, he stood alone looking at the satellite imagery of empty ocean. Subject Alpha was still out there, still operational, still representing a variable he couldn't account for in any tactical framework. That was unacceptable. He'd find a way, build the systems, develop the protocols. The next time that thing surfaced, humanity would be ready. Or so he told himself. 1,400 miles north, in the ruins of the Baxter Building, Reed Richards ran different calculations. Tracking patterns, energy signatures, behavioral analysis across the entire invasion period. The walking cataclysm hadn't been random, hadn't been mindless. Its movements correlated too precisely with hive activity, with structural weak points, with opportunities that seemed almost coordinated. Almost. He couldn't prove intelligence, couldn't demonstrate conscious planning. But the patterns were there, mathematical and undeniable. "What are you thinking?" Sue asked, materializing beside him in the temporary laboratory they'd set up. "That we survived because something older than civilization decided the invasion violated something. Territory, ecosystem balance, rules we don't have language for." He gestured at the data. "And now it's gone back to whatever depths it came from, and we have no idea if it'll respond next time, or what constitutes a threat in its assessment. So we prepare for variables we can't control. We always do." At the Sanctum Sanctorum, Strange stood before the window of the worlds and watched currents of possibility flow through probable futures. In most timelines, the walking cataclysm remained beneath the waves, dormant, waiting for triggers that might never occur. In some timelines, it surfaced again, sometimes fighting threats, sometimes causing them. The distinction seemed arbitrary from a human perspective, but from a planetary perspective, Strange suspected the distinction was perfectly clear. The thing in the depths that didn't care about nations or species. It cared about balance, about systems maintaining proper function. Humanity was part of that system, but not the center of it. That was going to be a difficult lesson for people like Ross to accept. Strange closed the window, let the futures collapse back into probability. Humanity would prepare its defenses, develop its protocols, convince itself that next time would be different. And the ocean would keep its secrets until circumstances required otherwise. In Atlantis, Namor reviewed reports from scouts monitoring the deep trenches. No thermal signatures, no seismic activity. The ancient thing had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. But he knew better. Knew it was out there, in depths even Atlanteans rarely explored. Knew it would return when the next imbalance required correction. Until then, he would maintain the boundaries. Keep the surface world's problems from bleeding into his domain. Ensure that when the next crisis came, the ocean remained clean enough for its immune response to function. The surface could have its debates about containment and control. The depths would simply endure. On a rooftop in Manhattan, Steve Rogers looked at the harbor. The water was calm, peaceful. Gave no indication that something capable of leveling cities had walked through it 3 weeks ago. Still think we did the right thing? Tony asked, landing beside him. New arc reactor installed, armor repaired. Looking almost like the invasion had never happened. We survived, Steve said. 8 million people are still alive because we held the line. That's the right thing. And Subject Alpha Ross is building an entire program around containing it. Ross is doing what Ross does, trying to control variables that can't be controlled. Steve turned from the harbor. We'll deal with that when we have to. Optimistic. Practical. We've got enough immediate problems without borrowing future ones. Tony didn't argue. They stood in silence, watching the city rebuild itself one crane at a time. Somewhere in the Atlantic, in darkness that had never seen sunlight, something ancient rested, dormant but not gone, waiting for the next imbalance that would require correction. The planet had its immune response, humanity had its time to recover, and the ocean kept its secrets. For now, that was enough. Okay, so we officially made it to the epilogue, and I need to scream, 'cause General Ross is back on his nonsense, and he learned absolutely nothing. He's literally standing in the Pentagon calling Godzilla Subject Alpha, like he's a high school science project and trying to bill him for the property damage, sir. That lizard just saved the entire planet from an alien god, and you are mad about the budget. Ross really looked at a map of the ocean and said, I'm going to build a fence around that, which is the most delusional thing I have ever heard, because you cannot arrest a force of nature. Meanwhile, Reed Richards and Dr. Strange are looking at the data like, yeah, good luck with that, because they finally realized Godzilla is literally the planet's immune system, and we are just guests living on his rock. Namor is back in Atlantis, gatekeeping the deep ocean, and probably laughing at us, which is honestly valid. And the Avengers are just standing on a roof, being grateful we are alive, while Godzilla takes a well-deserved nap in the bottom of the sea. We survived the apocalypse, besties, but Ross is definitely going to cause the next one because he can't leave the giant radioactive lizard alone.
Hey, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notification so you won't miss out future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time in this channel.